Hi, this is Ibadi NX from the Candid Frame, and we're back for a new year. Not only with episodes on the podcast, but with new videos on the YouTube channel. And what I'm planning to do with the channel here is go through the Candid Frame Flickr group here and just pick images and find different topics to talk about photography using these as illustrations. There's some really great pictures in there. And not only do I want to be able to showcase some of the photographs I particularly like, but I also wanted to be able to be instructional in some ways and help you not just see what pictures I like, but also get a sense of how to see a little differently so you can improve your photographs. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to talk about shadow. And I wrote a book called Chasing the Light, and in it I described a lot of different ways of seeing and using light in order to make better photographs. And in the book and in the workshops, one of the things I often stress is that if you want to know what's happening with the light, pay attention to the shadows, because the shadows tell you so much about the quality of the light. If you have really hard, deep shadows, then you're probably dealing with some direct, high contrast light. If the shadows are kind of muted or diffused, it's probably a slightly overcast. If everything is fairly even, you're either in a very sort of cloudy day or an area of deep shade. And that bit of information tells you a lot, not only in terms of what you need to do with respect to exposure, but what you can expect your image to look like. But today I want to show you some photographs here that have shadow as a major component of why the photographs work, and hopefully you'll take away some things that from that. So here's this image by Zymowit Maj. I'm butchering the name. I'm almost positive. I apologize for that. But this is the one of the first pictures that I saw, and I really loved the subtlety of the image, the muted colors, the lines and shapes there, the gesture of the person holding the phone, and what appears to be the keys or of a purse, is just great, and the reflection in this wall here is just fantastic. It almost looks like a face. But one of the reasons why this image really works for me is because these elements that I'm pointing out to you, the hand, the phone, the reflection, all of that is being illuminated by some sort of light source. But my eyes are being directed there, not just because it's the brightest area in the frame, but because you have these darker areas, these areas of shadow in other parts of the photograph. Our eyes are automatically drawn to the brightest element in the frame. So shadow helps to de-emphasize other portions of the frame and help to guide your eye to exactly where the photographer wants you to take a look. And it's just right here. And one of the things we'll be looking at, we'll be looking at some black and white and some color photographs, and you'll see how those shadow can be really prominently displayed in a black and white photograph. Shadow can be used just as effectively in a color photograph, and I think he's done a really great job with this shot. Here's a portrait by Robert Fischer. It's a lovely shot to begin with. I love the face, the whole body language, the gesture of the hand coming up to the shoulder is just very, very classic, and of course the quality of the light that's coming in is just wonderful. You couldn't ask for better. I sometimes don't like working with dappled light, but in this particular photograph, I think it works really well. One reason because of that is you still get a good amount of the face being illuminated by the light. You lose some details to shadow, which he may have opened up later in Photoshop, but the most important parts of this subject are retained here. But let's pay particular attention to what's happening with the hand, because the hand is such a critical component of this shot. That gesture really makes the image. If you can imagine the shot without that hand in there, it still might be a good portrait, but it wouldn't have the impact that I think it has now. There's just something very vulnerable about the way this person is holding their hand in the frame. But the reason why our eyes are so drawn to here and here is all this shadow that's happening here. You have this shadow in between the arm and the shoulder and the hand. You have it on the opposing side here, and the shadow serves to frame it within the frame, and it helps to direct our eye. There's a lot of other stuff that's happening in terms of line because your eye. This is kind of a sort of a classic composition because you're coming in here at the face and you're moving down the arm and then up the arm and back here and then back to the face. So it's as near a perfect composition as you can probably imagine. But the shadows for me are very critical to the shot. It's a black and white shot. It might have worked just as good as a color shot, but I think the drama certainly comes across here in this black and white image. Here's another Carla shot. Paid photography is the name, and this looks to be a cabinet in a kitchen because this looks to be a cabinet, and this looks like it might be a cutting board, and I'm not sure what the other elements here, but this shot is all about how the shadows create an area of focus for the cabinet, for the color of the cabinet, for the texture of the wood, for the hinge, and even though we can't absolutely tell what these objects are here, it serves as a counterpoint to what's happening here. The composition is really nicely balanced, and one of the things that I like about this shot is that there's a lot of rhythm to it because there's a lot of repetition of line. You have these horizontal, vertical lines that are getting repeated throughout the frame. But look at how shadow, even though it's sort of an abstract shot, shadow helps to define those shapes. And it also brings out the richness of the color there. If this was shot with a more uniform or even quality of light where everything was sort of evenly illuminated, it wouldn't be an interesting shot. It would just be flat. And though the shapes might still be there, you wouldn't linger on the shot like you are here. So it's amazing how shadow, even though it obscures certain things, makes us want to linger and really absorb a photograph in a way that doesn't happen when something is completely revealed by being fully illuminated. This is another one by Paid Photography. Again, it's the shadow. Look at what's happening with the shadow here. This shot is obviously about this fence and this post here, and the frame within. He's using the window as a framing device within the shot. But again, we're paying attention to this because this is the brightest element in the frame, and we're immediately drawn to there. But we're also drawn to this little area here where the light is hitting the drapes. And all of this stuff is in shadow. This is in shadow. This is in shadow. And all of it is just giving us a counterpoint to all this here. The bright white, the blues, and the strong repeating shapes that happen throughout the image. So it seems to be this is intentionally or unintentionally a sort of motif for this particular photographer because at least with these two photographs, it seems to be something that he or she is particularly drawn to. Okay, here's this shot by Tu Tam of Chaplin impersonator, and it looks to be somewhere in Europe, in Streets of Venice there. And again, this shot is about primarily the subject here, but it's also about this shadow. And for me, the shadow is the thing that draws my attention first, surprisingly. You can see the details in the figures, and he's wonderfully illuminated by this strong directional light, which brings out the details of his suit, the tie, his face. But it's the shadow that really expresses his body language in a way that this doesn't. Surprisingly, I mean, we're having a perfect view of his pose here, but it's when we look at his shadow that we get an expression of his personality, which is kind of surprising. But that's why the shadow is so important in this shot. And for me, as a photographer, that would probably be the first thing that I'd see. I'd see the shadow and I'd go, "Oh, I want to be able to use that." I don't just want to make a portrait of that subject. I might do that, but I'd go and see that shadow and go, I have to make use of that in some way because that's going to be the heart of the image. It serves not only as a counterpoint, but in this case, it tells us so much about the subject. Now, People may not think a lot about shadow when it comes to the landscapes, but look at this shot. The shadows really make this shot work. Ugo Say is creating this landscape with this directional light in this mist, and it's the edge shadow on these trees that help really to define them. They're defined not only in terms of their up and down shape, but also the texture on the bark itself. Without that side light, that texture that we're seeing in these trees wouldn't be there. And it's the shadow that, even though it isn't a prominent element in the photograph, it still helps to shape how we experience the image. So when I'm shooting and I see a scene like this, I'm often thinking about shooting it from the perspective of the shadow side or from the edge side, not front lit, because front lit tends to be really flat and kind of boring. So I'm always paying attention to what's happening with the shadows to see how it defines not just the subject itself, but everything else in the background. And lastly, here's Georgios Karamanis with a shot made in Stockholm, Sweden. It's a color shot, and it's a shot that might work just as well as a black and white as it does with color. And this image is a lot about repetition and shape. It seems like a lot of the images that we're looking at today are about that, and that's largely because I'm picking images that use very strong directional light and creates this very hard edge shadow. So shapes are going to be accentuated when you use that kind of light. But he uses it to really nice effect because the repeating pattern of these pillars that go down the length are strengthened all the more, and they really help to guide the eye to this figure at the end of the pathway there. And we also get some of the nice shadowing here on the wall here, and little kisses of light, not only on the lights but also on the stairs here. I like the fact that it has some sort of detail there rather than it just being a blank, featureless wall. That adds a little nice sense of place to the image. And ultimately, what's critical here is having that figure of that person walking down the path, because otherwise the only destination would be this window here. And since shadow seems to be such an important part of this photograph, waiting for a figure there really helps to make the photograph. So I hope that you like what you saw there. As you can see, we got a lot of images in the community here, and I'm looking forward to going through more and more of these in the coming weeks and months, and sharing some of my insights about photography. So I recommend and welcome you submitting images to them, and hopefully we'll be able to create a dialogue. And if there's a particular topic that you want me to talk about or touch on, just send me an email. You can email me at info@thecandidframe.com, and I welcome any suggestions. If you aren't already a fan of the show, you can visit us at thecandidframe.com, where we have over 215 interviews with some of the world's best photographers, and it's a big part of what we do here. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.